For anyone who's seen my review of 007 Bloodstone, then you'll know I have a soft spot for the James Bond games. They're not a perfect game series, but I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of them, so I always keep an eye on any new James Bond game coming out. When 007 Legends was announced, I was excited for it. The concept was interesting, it was the official game for Skyfall, and it was being made by Eurocom. Eurocom made both Nightfire and the remake of GoldenEye, which are two of my favourite Bond games. Everything was in place for the perfect Bond game, but I didn't end up buying it at first due to the large amount of games coming out around the same time and the fact that the game got bad reviews. I was still curious about it now, and I finally picked myself a copy and I've beaten it. So is 007 Legends the ultimate Bond game, or are the reviews right? Let's have a look. The story is that when James Bond gets shot in Skyfall, he hits the water and relives his past adventures as in the older James Bond films. It means the game is split into 6 sections, one for each film featured. This story is pretty stupid, but I guess I can't complain as they needed to tie in together the 6 films somehow. What I will complain about though is the fact that in each film, Daniel Craig is James Bond. It's similar to what they did with the GoldenEye remake, but it doesn't work here. Each James Bond is unique and different, so it doesn't make sense to have Daniel Craig in the same situations. Having Daniel Craig fistfight Jaws is just such a bizarre setup that it takes you out of it way too much. If the point in the game was to relive classic James Bond moments, then they shouldn't have had Daniel Craig in every situation. They did change each film to try and fit them to Daniel Craig's James Bond, and for gameplay purposes as well, but this makes things even worse, so most of the classic James Bond moments just fall flat rather than be enjoyable. I rewatched the films that were in this game before playing it, so let's have a look at the choices here. The first is Goldfinger, and I think it's the best choice. It's one of the best James Bond films and has so many classic moments. The next one is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. The reason it's here is because the game has one film for each of the James Bond, so for George Lazenby they didn't really have much to work with. The next is Moonraker, and I think they could have done better here. They obviously picked Moonraker so they could have a space level, but I would have preferred The Spy Who Loved Me. The next one is License to Kill, and I'm okay with that choice as it's either this or The Living Daylights, and License to Kill has a great ending chase. The next one is Die Another Day, which is an understandable choice but the wrong one. GoldenEye has been done to death and there's already games for Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough, so Die Another Day does make sense. Die Another Day does have enough good moments in it, but personally I would have liked to see them tackle Tomorrow Never Dies instead. The last one is Skyfall, so no problems there. Overall the choices are good, but one thing that is strange is that you play Moonraker 5th rather than 3rd. It seems like they changed the order as they wanted the space mission to be the last mission, although that doesn't really make that much sense because Skyfall is the last mission, so really they should have been in the correct order that they originally were released. Gameplay builds upon the GoldenEye remake, as in it's a first-person shooter which is divided between action and stealth sections. There is a greater emphasis on action here, which is a welcome change as GoldenEye was mostly stealth. Unfortunately, the action is not good. It's exactly the same as any Call of Duty game, only not as well made. The Call of Duty style battlefields do not make sense for a James Bond game, and it's very dull due to the large amount of enemies you have to get through and kill. You spend half the game shooting large groups of enemies and it gets very repetitive as each battlefield could have been in any other first person shooter, and nothing separates them or makes them interesting. There are parts that you get to use night vision goggles, but this is so out of place and weird. James Bond doesn't use night vision goggles and the filter is too bright, making things hard to see. It makes the game feel like Call of Duty, which once again takes you out of the James Bond experience. The stealth involves going around either avoiding enemies or taking them out to achieve your objectives. The stealth in the GoldenEye remake was well done and enjoyable, but something seriously went wrong for 007 Legends. The areas are now way too big, so taking out all the enemies is a chore and it's too easy to set off the alarm. When someone spots you, the alarm goes off and everyone instantly knows where you are and reinforcements are called in. You get attacked by so many enemies when the alarm goes off, but it's still perfectly possible to take them all out, but due to just how many shows up, it gets really boring trying to progress if the alarm does go off. There's no way to reset the alarm or go back into stealth mode, so you have no choice to either kill everyone or restart the checkpoint. Areas needed to be more contained with fewer enemies, which is confusing because that's exactly how they did it in the GoldenEye remake that Eurocom also made. A new feature to the stealth is the distraction system, where in a certain situation you can create distractions to separate groups of enemies to take them out one by one. It's a nice idea, but it's executed horribly as it's not clear where and with what you can make distractions, and when you do create distractions, the enemies don't separate. One will investigate it and the other will just stare straight at him the whole time. I wouldn't mind the distractions, but because they exist, there's always two enemies together in stealth sections, and it's way too hard to take them out each time, so you're going to set off the alarm. The stealth gets worse when you enter critical stealth sections, where if you set off the alarm, it's game over. They are annoying, but I do have to say they do make you think about every move you make, but having to restart when you get spotted for some dumb reason is annoying. I want to stop talking about the stealth, but I have one more thing to complain about: the radar. You have a map screen in the corner, but to track enemy movements you have to use your wristwatch, which acts as a radar. This was a terrible idea, as due to just how many enemies there are, it's hard to keep track of them all without checking your wristwatch constantly. Why couldn't the enemies just appear on the normal map on the time, rather than when they're just shooting? It would have made planning a route through them a lot better. Right, so let's move on to the gadgets in this game. Of course, one thing that defines James Bond are his gadgets, and this game has a few. Well, when I say a few, I mean that you use your smartphone as a gadget, and it has 3 different modes. One is the photo mode, where you can take pictures, but only if it's at an objective. Another is the electronic mode, where you can detect wires and hack. The hacking is actually pretty cool, with one making you change how much pressure you put on the triggers, and the other one making you think by matching up colours in a grid. The last one is some biofilter, which you can scan for fingerprints or odours. The smartphone is pretty cool, but they make you use it way too much. For the majority of objectives, you have to scan something in a room, which can always be unclear. It doesn't help that when you have to look for something, they disable your run, so searching a room can take longer than it needs to. Speaking of searching a room, this game has collectibles and secondary objectives. The secondary objectives are nice, but the collectibles are a pain, as they're all random items, so keeping an eye out for them is hard without searching every single surface in every single area. With this being a James Bond game, there are other gameplay styles. The first are the one-on-one fistfights, which are pretty much long quick-time events. These aren't fun to play, as you just hit certain directions on the stick until you win. I get why they're here, as defeating the James Bond villains usually comes down to a fistfight, but they needed to be more interactive to be entertaining. As they are, they just suck out enjoyment you would have had from facing off classic Bond villains like Oddjob. Another gameplay style is the driving, which takes place during License to Kill and Die Another Day. Like I mentioned, License to Kill has a great ending chase, but they really messed it up. For some reason they decided to make you drive a jeep rather than an oil tanker. I wanted to drive the oil tanker and ram others off the road, not some boring vehicle. Despite the changes to the film, this section is not fun to play, as the side of the roads are littered with guys with rocket launchers, which don't really damage your jeep, but instead make you spin out of control, losing all your speed. The other driving section is in Die Another Day, where you have to drive on the ice. It's faithful to the film, but feels very limp. It looks pretty bad, and there's very little to it to make it good. Another part of the game I feel compelled to bring up is the skiing in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It doesn't feel like you're skiing at all, as you hold your gun normally, so it feels like you're just floating along on the snow. What's worse is that you have to keep up with someone, but the controls are a pain, as you have to hold down a button to accelerate. You have to accelerate to keep up, but you also have to slow down to avoid trees, so ultimately it's frustrating. Let's get to the part of the review that I'm going to call the technical problems of 007 Legends. The biggest one is just how much screen tear there is. I've never seen so much screen tear in a game, and it even happens on the main menu screen. Another problem that happened way too often than it should have done is that when you quickly turn to look at someone and then aim your weapon to shoot them, the auto-aim will send you flying to some side. The next is the painfully long loading screens you have to sit through when you die and have to restart a checkpoint. Mix this fact with all the other gameplay problems this game has and you're going to be annoyed at any section you get stuck on. I'm going to quickly list some other technical problems I noticed. Enemies don't always fall to the floor when you kill them, meaning that some of them get propped up behind cover so they look like they're still alive. You have to hold down X to pick up frag grenades for some reason. There are no subtitles. You can't lie down despite the Call of Duty design of the action. At one point I had to restart a checkpoint because the game refused to acknowledge I had cleared the room of all the enemies. And finally, when you switch to a gadget, you can't just use Y, which is change the weapon button, you have to press the D-pad. I don't know if Eurocom were feeling lazy or if it was just rush, but either way this game is a mess. There is more to this game than just the campaign. You can unlock the Skyfall missions by going to Xbox Live Marketplace, as 007 Legends was released a week before Skyfall was. I thought this was a nice idea, but after playing the Skyfall missions I have no idea why they bothered. You get 3 short missions, with the last one being an annoying shoot-off with Patrice. Once you beat him, you get a quick look at Daniel Craig and the game ends. If you aren't going to have anything beyond the first 40 minutes of the film, then why imply that you did by making you have to unlock the missions and releasing them after Skyfall was released to try and avoid spoilers? If you want 007 Legends so you can play through cool moments in Skyfall, don't bother, as the moments that are in this game are just bad. James Bond doesn't even get shot in the right place in the cutscene, and there's also another pointless cutscene showing James Bond getting washed ashore after being shot, and being pretty much fine. The other extras are the challenges, which are like Spec Op modes from Call of Duty. These aren't fun, as you only play parts of the levels that you've already beaten in campaign, only this time you're timed. The last one is the multiplayer, which I would comment on, but I couldn't find anyone to play with online, so I'm assuming it's nothing special. I have never played a game where it had so much promise to be good and turned out so horrendously bad. As a James Bond game, it's not good due to how much they messed up with what happens in the film and the Call of Duty style shootouts. As a standard FPS, it's not good as it's dull, tedious and a technical mess. Every idea here is stolen or is simply bad, with next to nothing redeeming this game. I don't know what happened at Eurocom, but I can see why they went out of business after releasing 007 Legends. My score is 3.0 out of 10. With terrible game design and poor execution of almost everything in this game, it's nowhere near as good as it could have been.